everyone for coming. I will be talking about identity oracles and identity in general as one of the most important aspects for mass adoption of Web3. So I think one of the corner realizations is that most of what we know is finance, especially in traditional finance, is actually tied to identity. Think about, everything that you do. You open a bank account, you get a credit line, you buy a car. None of that is possible without identity. And actually, in reality, like over 60% of all of traditional finance is tied to identity. So if we want to have something, we want to have a real mass adoption of Web3 payments, of Web3 payrolls, of under-collateralized lending on-chain, we are going to have to employ some form of on-chain identity. But the issue is, how can we have an on-chain identity solution that is compliant, but at the same time fulfills the ethos of Web3? So how can we have an identity solution that is person-bound, sufficiently person-bound to be compliant, but at the same time decentralized and private by design? So that's when we want to introduce a new primitive for Web3 that we call a zero-knowledge identity oracle. So it's a completely new way of thinking identity, a way in which you do not need to have a trusted single issuer that is able to identify the user at any time, but actually you use an oracle approach to bridge identities from somewhere where they are trusted, for example, on-chain or cross-chain, and fully programmatically, so meaning fully without the need of any centralized entity to be an intermediate between the holder and the verifier, bridge the trust between them two. So how does it work? How many of you have seen the identity triangle of trust? Like, how many have seen this thing where a credential holder interacts with a verifier and an issuer? No one? Then let me quickly try to explain it. So I said, let's make it interactive, so I'm going to skip and then come back because I think we have a little bit more time. So this is how identity was done in Web 1. Holder, like an end user, wants to access some kind of service, for example, wants to open a bank account, or wants to get payments, or wants to have payroll. So they need to go to a verifier. The verifier and the holder, they do not trust each other, because it's easy for the verifier to scam the holder, or the other way around, for the holder to scam the verifier. So what to do? Since they don't trust each other, both of them trust a third party, an issuer, like a centralized government, something like this. So the government gives the holder something that is really, really difficult to fake. So for example, a passport, and says, dear holder, with this thing that is difficult to fake, you can go to the verifier and say that you are the person that you claim to be. All good. The issue with this kind of setup is that it's not really digital, right? You cannot have the passport as a digital good. So what people came up with approximately 10, 15 years ago was the concept of decentralized identifiers or verifiable credentials, in which actually you do not trust the passport itself, the physical representation of the passport, but you actually trust something that is called a verifiable data registry. So that's like an online registry where all of the different passports are maintained and is easily accessible for the verifier to check, does this passport number really, really exist? All good, but what are the issues? The issues for this kind of thing is that it's always ecosystem specific. So you always need this one centralized issuer that is able to dox, that is able to combine the real identity of the holder with their ecosystem specific actions. So for example, imagine when you do an online payment. Every online payment is linked to a payment processor, and the payment processor is able to link your payment history with your identity. But we don't want to have that on-chain, right? We want to have a payment system that is compliant, but at the same time also private, so that no one can at any time combine your real identity with whatever you do on-chain. So this doesn't really work. And what I'm trying to say is that every single DID protocol in this world does not work. The future is going to be zero-knowledge identity oracles. Why? So as you can see, in this kind of setup, there is no centralized issuer. So we replace the centralized issuer, the one party everyone has to trust, with trust into code. So the holder, you as the user, you self-generate proofs for the things that you want to claim. And the only thing that is then processed on-chain is a list of zero-knowledge eligibility proofs that, for example, state, I am over 18, I am a US citizen, and I'm not a wanted criminal. So actually what the verifier in this setup has to trust is just the code itself and not the centralized issuer. Yeah, so with this kind of setup, you have a solution that is both compliant while at the same time being decentralized and private by design. And I mean, going back, this allows, no matter on what kind of chain you are, on what kind of chain ecosystem, to prove details about your user base without having to access any data. And if you think about it, there are so many different use cases in which you actually rely on identity data. So from the obvious financial use cases where you KYC your user base, but all the way, to healthcare. When you go to a doctor, you show, here's my my medical history, and the doctor has to trust that you are not faking your medical history, and the other way around, right? Or education. We were just saying, like, if you want to hire someone, you want to make sure that they are not faking their educational background. So all of these things, all of these issues of digital identities, fulfilling regulatory requirements, removing any issue from centralization, like the issue that a centralized entity could copy your credentials at any time, could resell them, could remove you from reusing those credentials, can be removed with a decentralized identity solution. And that's exactly what zkMe has built over the last couple of months. And at the moment we have several use cases live. And then let me just quickly jump into a couple of them and then maybe do a deep dive into the zero-knowledge KYC solution. So at the moment we offer anti-bot and anti-Sybil solutions. So if you have a protocol that needs to make sure that you only interact with real human actors, you can use our solution. And on the other extreme, we have general web data attestation. So that means if you have users that have Web2 social media accounts, you can make attestations, you can make claims about their social media accounts and check their backgrounds. So for example, you could say, I only want to interact with users that can prove to me that they have at least 5,000 followers on Twitter. And in order to do that, you could use our web data attestation service. And then maybe most relevant at the moment is our zero-knowledge KYC solution, in which you can legally KYC your user base without compromising on decentralization and privacy. Why is that needed? Most of all, it's needed because of upcoming legislation. So you either have some intrinsic motivation to KYC your user base because you have some risk management issue, you want to make sure, for example, you have an under-collateralized lending protocol, you want to make sure you know who you're lending to, or you're driven by legal requirements. So legal requirements, most of all and most importantly, is going to be the TFR law that is coming in January of 2025 that will require every single for-profit crypto company, let me just repeat, every single one. So no matter if you're a DeFi company, an NFT company, a social company, if you want to be legal in Europe, by January 2025, you have to KYC every single wallet that you interact with. And how are you going to do that? Like, in my opinion, only 4 different ways of answering to this law. You either say you're not a company, right? Like I'm a DAO and I'm completely open sourced and I'm not subject to any laws. You avoid legislation by saying, I ensure that I do not onboard any US citizens, I don't onboard any European citizens. And one question.
Recently we do have one
Yeah.
in Switzerland try to sign an agreement with us? How are you guys able to deal with that?
Switzerland is part of EFTA, right? So also has to fulfill MiCA and TFR requirements.
Yeah, so basically they have a on-chain entity registered in some part of Switzerland.
Yeah.
So how are you guys able to handle more like a one-to-one mapping of who registered with that address? Or
Yes. So what you're mentioning is KYB, like know your business rather than know your customer. At the moment, we're very much focused on retail verification, but we're working on a KYB solution as well. So in the future, if you have a company and you want to make sure that you know what kind of company you're interacting with, we will also offer on-chain solutions. But at the moment, it's retail focused. So B2C, like B2B2C. Yeah. So long story short, sooner or later, every single company that you interact with in Web3 has to go through some kind of this solution. And the alternatives are not very, you don't have many alternatives. You either go with a centralized solution or you go with a decentralized solution. And the past has shown that decentralized solutions do not work, especially in DeFi do not work. You cannot have a really, really lean D app that does not process any data and then at the same time have a big, expensive whitelisting process just to access that permissioned DeFi pool. So some providers like Aave and Fireblocks have tried that in the past but failed. So what I'm trying to say is if you're trying to do permissioned Web3 protocols, maybe now is the right time to think about a decentralized KYC solution. So if you are looking for a decentralized KYC solution, what should you be looking out for? So in my opinion, it's 3 different buckets. Is the solution that you're employing really compliant? Like, does it really fulfill all of the legal requirements? And I think the buzzwords are going to be the 4 here. Like, does it provide data recoverability? Like, for example, Polygon ID does not have data recoverability, and is thus not legal for KYC. Does it fulfill travel rule? Does it fulfill standards like the W3C? Is it user-friendly? Like, how difficult is it for the user to really go through a verification? And then, in my opinion, really, really important in order to fulfill this promise of Web3, is it end-to-end zero knowledge? Or is it a provider that is just doing a centralized KYC solution and then just pretending to generate a proof on chain? So if you look out for these kind of 3 things, you will be able to find a solution that is that fulfills your requirements. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Come talk to us if you're interested in learning more. The application is already available. You can test it at any time if you go to app.zk.me. Yeah, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask.
What is the process of integrating with the Oracle on-chain?
Very good question. So you're asking from a company perspective, right? From a project perspective.
I'm a protocol owner. Let's
Yeah.
say I have some smart contracts and I want to KYC all the access that interact.
Perfect. So you have to distinguish between 3 different actions that you can take as a protocol. Action number 1 is you want to guide your user to do the initial verification. So your user has not been verified yet, so they need to go through verification. In order to do that, we provide a JavaScript SDK that can be integrated within your front end to guide your user through the verification. So that's number 1. Then number 2, or action number 2, is you want to do a one-time check. Like, does my user fulfill my eligibility criteria? So for example, is the user over 18? We call this action a verify action. For that, we provide a smart contract or an API, depending on how centralized your solution is, to do this verification check. And then action number 3 is a so-called certify action that goes one step further, allowing you to be able to recover the data in case bad actor proceedings are initiated against the user. Because, you know, KYC always requires 2 things. It requires you to be able to know your user before the user comes into your service, and then have enforceability in case the user is is a wanted criminal or something like this. So for these kind of actions, we provide both an API and a smart contract for you to do the verification. Yeah, if you go to our website, there's a link to our documentation hub that describes, but the the integration itself should not take more than 2 days. Yeah, if no other questions, thank you so much, and yeah, please.
Is zkKYC, is it going to be 100% compliant with EU or US regulations, or
Yeah.
is it something that you have to work on?
Yeah, so very good question. So zkKYC was built with the FATF standard in mind. So the FATF is like an international body that produces the AML KYC standard for all of the world to follow. I would say 99% of all countries follow this rules, but there are some countries that have special rules that go beyond that. So at the moment, most countries are covered by our solution. In the EU specifically, 25 out of 26, so all countries except Germany, have approved this kind of solution. But starting from 1st of January 2025, all countries within Europe will accept this solution. So, yeah, it covers almost all of the countries around the world. Okay, thank you so much.